All right. Well, hi, everyone. Hello. Welcome to From Insight to Impact, video interviews with leaders in marketing strategy and research. And I am happy to have James Forr with us today. And I'm going to stop the shares, the better to see you with. So this is great. Thank you, James, for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you
Uh,
for the invitation, Jay.
Absolutely, yes, and I'll mention just some background about James. That James is the head of insights at Olson Zaltman, a market research firm founded by Dr. Gerald Zaltman from Harvard Business School and Dr. Jerry Olson from Penn State University. I will mention that Gerald Zaltman is no relation to me as far as I know, uh, but we have been confused sometimes in the past with hilarious results. And but James, thank you for being here. James has led consumer insights projects for major global brands, including Amazon, Target, Molson Coors, and P&G, and has published articles with Quirks, QRCA Views, SMR, Green Book, and Media Post. So it is. I was so happy, James, that you were willing and available to do this because really great to have your input and your thoughts on the topics that we want to talk about. This idea of from insight to impact is really a thing that's on all of our minds. Um, yeah, and really, obviously, you and I talked, and I read that amazing white paper that you wrote recently, and that kind of got me that was perfect for the things that I was hoping to talk about, and I'll jump right in with kind of the I guess the big picture question for me and for many of us is this question of how um, in the age of AI, how can we still provide value to clients? If it's okay that I'm jumping in with a big question. Actually, before I do that, unless there's anything else you want to say before we get started, or did I
No,
introduce
Jay,
you
that
correctly?
that
Yeah.
that was a great introduction. Let's jump into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So thanks. Yeah. So what are your thoughts about that? Like how do we provide? It seems like this question has become more urgent in the age of AI. We always want to provide value to clients, but now more than ever, I think we need to demonstrate that. So tell me your thoughts.
No doubt, it's become a very salient issue that all of us in this industry are thinking about. I would answer that question with a provocative question of my own, which would be, are we really collectively, as market research professionals, are we really providing value to our clients to the extent that we should be? There was a Cannes Lion survey of 1,000 marketers and creative directors recently, and more than half of those people rated their ability to develop high quality insights as either poor or very poor, which is pretty damning. And the most cited reason, most cited explanation is really a lack of clarity on what an insight even is. And I think you and I have both been around long enough to see insight decks that really aren't very insightful. Consumers want to be healthier these days, or millennials, they value authenticity, which is one of my favorites because it's like, okay, as opposed to what previous generations that like being lied to. And what is that? What are we even talking about? We've all seen insights like that that just are not that insightful. They're facts, maybe, but they're just a little bit flabby and too loose to be really actioned upon. So I think one of the ways that we can stay relevant or become even more relevant to clients, provide even more value to clients, is just to be a little sharper with what we think about as being insights. So, for example, and also beyond that, um, be a little bit more of a strategic thought partner than maybe insights are thought of right now. One of my friends, Mike Courtney, who is the CEO of Apereo Insights, he was just speaking at the Future of Insights Summit down in Atlanta. And he said, in a crisis, let's say your house is on fire, you don't call the library and ask for a book about fire extinguishers. You call the fire department because they have the know-how. They will come and they will put out that fire for you. I think a lot of times in insights we're thought about more as the library of facts, as opposed to the people who can solve the problems. And I think the more that we can work to overcome that perception, the better we will be, particularly in this age of AI.
Yeah, that's very thought provoking. I love that the analogy to the fire department versus the library. Um, and this makes me think that the white paper that you wrote that I commented on, you mentioned that you used the term insight atrophy for those kinds of insights that are not as helpful. And of course, the first thing that leaps to mind, and I know a lot of my colleagues would be saying the same thing, is but starting with but.
Right.
But it feels like this, like it feels like a client issue where the clients are coming to us and saying, "Oh, I want this less helpful research," or "I'm not coming to you for actual strategic partnership." Maybe it is this fact that they're treating us like the library and not like the fire department. And of course, even if that is the case, the question is what do we do about that? And I'm sure this is something that you've encountered where clients are asking for something that's not going to be the most helpful or the best use of what we can provide. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on handling that kind of thing?
That happens a lot. And I think the key to overcoming that is for us to ask those clients better questions. We like to say in research that consumers don't always know what they want. And I would say clients don't always know what they want either, which is not intended as an insult. It's just that it's our job many times to try to help clients think about their problems a little bit more deeply. So, in other words, sometimes the question that you as a client want to answer is not necessarily the question that you should ask. So, to give you an example of that, we were doing some research, this was some years ago now, for a brand of breakfast cereal. And of course, the problem they wanted to solve is how do we sell more of our breakfast cereal? Because as all brands do, occasionally they were going through a little bit of a slump. So they came to us, and the original thought was, let's understand our brand a little bit more, which is a viable question. But as we got to talking to them, we realized that they already kind of knew a lot about their brand. So we were wondering what more can we bring to the table? So we thought let's ask about the broader context in which your brand plays. So in this case, of course, it was breakfast. So we said, well, what do you know about breakfast? And he said, well, we know some stuff about breakfast. Not a lot, but we know some about that breakfast occasion. And one of the things that we know is that that is a very important bonding time for mom and her child, because that's the time they come together in the morning. They can spend some quiet time. They can talk one on one, etc. So we said, that's interesting. What do you know about the mother child relationship? They said, well, we don't really know anything about the mother child relationship. So we said, maybe you ought to study that, because that is the really broader context in which your product is playing. So we did that research where we went very deep into the mother-child relationship. And what we learned was there were 7 stages of childhood, essentially. And there were 7 stage gates where there were these moments where the mom said, I see my kid just did something really interesting there. That's a sign to me that they've moved into another stage. Like when they're really young, when they make their own first friend independently. That's a big moment for a mom because that's a sign that my kid is growing up. So there were 7 of these stages and 7 of these transition points. And often that realization that my child has moved to a different stage, that often comes during breakfast. So what this brand was able to do is they created an entire campaign built around these 7 stages of childhood. They created um, promotions and product activations that were really built around those 7 stages. And they were insights that served them in good stead for quite a few years. So that all goes back to your original question. How can we uh, overcome that insight atrophy when clients just seem to be asking for kind of surface level stuff? Sometimes there's nothing you can do about that, but one place to begin to try is to try to ask them some better questions.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great example, and a couple things that come to my mind is, certainly for those who are viewing this, of course, if you're on the client side, I think, just to emphasize the point that clients can benefit from leaving room to, you have these partners in your research insight partners, giving them room to be able to ask those questions or advise you on better use of research really is a win-win. But for those viewers who are researchers, insights people, it's interesting because you mentioned there's that moment in the relationship or in the interaction with the client where you gave the example where they said, let's understand our brand. And you came back to them and said, well, what's the broader context in which the brand plays? What do you know about breakfast? And I think that's a very important moment that a lot of us insights people may not stop and think about. It's like, okay, here's your opportunity to talk to the client about this. And I think it's great to train ourselves to do that, to ask those questions, like coming up with this, what's the context in which the brand plays, that kind of thing. I think that's great learning for all of us to say, okay, let's try to look for those questions and ask them at the right time. And I think that can help both sides to move more from an order taker to an actual, strategic partner, insights partner. So yeah, thanks for that. I'm making notes as you're
Yeah, and
talking.
yeah, as researchers, we're used to asking questions. We're used to asking those questions to consumers typically, but we can put on that same hat on those upfront conversations with clients. And sometimes you can't push the client off of what they originally came to you for, but quite often you can, and you can help them think about that research challenge a little bit differently, and then they begin to see you a little bit differently. They begin to see you as a real strategic partner rather than just a vendor, which is a term,
Yeah.
which is a term that we hate.
The dreaded term,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes. So I'm thinking, as you wrote about in that article had to do with AI versus non-AI, or AI versus humans, and you wrote about things that AI can't do. And certainly something that I've been working on is I feel like, you know, uh, getting at people's subconscious motivators is something that AI can't do yet, as far as we know.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
certainly, Olson Zaltman, I feel like, is known for exactly that. And I'm wondering, just very interested, as the head of insights at Olson Zaltman, I'm really interested to hear your thoughts about conscious versus subconscious drivers of customer decisions.
Well, they're both important, um, but the conscious drivers are often not all that interesting. And you could probably use AI to fairly easily get at conscious drivers because they're the things that are on the top of our heads. So, um, to use an example, in politics, it's important to know what issues are important to people. And there's a lot of research about that. And that's the conscious part. But if you are a candidate or if you are a party, you can't look at it as voters believe ABC about issues one, two, three, and therefore we're going to say ABC about issues one, two, three. You can do that, but you will probably fail. In order to communicate about those issues more effectively, that's where you really need to understand how the conscious mind is tied to the subconscious framework that holds them together. So, in the context of politics, American politics, what do those issues, what do my beliefs about those issues say about me as a person? What do they say about how I think about the country? What do they say about how I think about my place within the country? And all of those things are typically quite unconscious. And I'll give you an example, if I can, from the B2B space. We did some work some years ago for a seed brand, crop seed brand called NK Seed. And at the time, they were struggling a little bit, particularly struggling to maintain a differentiation, because essentially, crop seed is crop seed, corn seed is corn seed, Soybean seed is soybean seed from one brand to another. There are some differences, but very, very minor. And farmers don't really even know what it is or care, quite frankly. So they came to us and they had us do some research on with farmers, small family farmers, on your thoughts and feelings about crop seed. So we very quickly got to the conscious level stuff, which is I want this seed to grow and I want it to be disease resistant and pest resistant, and I want it at the end of the season to yield good crops. Important, not very insightful. But what was really insightful is how we tied that to the unconscious uh, 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 meaning of the seed. So, what we saw as we did some digging in is that farmers see themselves as being heroic. They're on a heroic journey. Now, if you ask them that directly, do you see yourself as being a hero? They would certainly say, no, I don't. But at an unconscious level, they do. They talk about the journey of their career. They started when they were young, working with their father's or mother's side on the farm. They didn't know what they were doing. They learned gradually through trial and error how to become a good farmer. So there's this journey of their career. There's the journey of a day where you don't know what's going to happen necessarily. You don't know what the prices are going to look like. You don't know if it's going to have a storm. You don't know if there's going to be some sort of disease. So you learn from that. There's the journey of generations. There's this great pride in the fact that I am farming the land that my great grandparents farmed, that my parents farmed, that I hope my children and grandchildren farm. So there are all these nested journeys, and it all starts with that little humble seed. So, yes. And what the brand was able to do was they created a campaign that was really not so much directly about the seed, but it was a lot about the farmer as hero and really celebrated the farmer. And it turned around that volume slide that they'd been experiencing for several years. It's a very emotional campaign. So that's an example of the conscious drivers being very important,
Yeah, yeah.
but
And the fact
the
that it's
unconscious being
B2B,
more important.
say that again.
No, but also the unconscious in many ways being
Yeah.
more important. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking about how, especially in a B2B area, it feels like people and our clients tend to feel like, well, B2B, that's definitely all just logical stuff, because they're business people. And of course we know that's not true. But that makes me think about it. It feels like many of the clients that I work with, at the very least, they have a bias toward, well, just ask them the question, like a bias toward go just for the conscious motivators and don't go for those subconscious drivers. And I'm wondering if you've have any advice or how do you go about conveying to clients, making sure the client understands that actually there is great value in going beyond those top of mind questions. Or I don't know if it's perhaps giving them an example like this one, or if you have any other tips or tricks to make sure that our clients understand that the importance of that.
Examples are very helpful in doing that. You can talk about a lot of the scientific research now that's come along over the last 20 years or so. Sometimes clients just have to experience it for themselves. To be honest, we get a lot less of that than we used to. I've been
Hmm.
doing this for 25 years, and we used to get a lot more pushback on this idea of the importance of the subconscious. We still do on occasion. I, it's funny, a colleague said something to me the other day that they were being challenged by someone in a meeting who said that all why because all you really need to know is about the product attributes, and I felt like John McEnroe. You cannot be serious. This is 2025, not 1985. There's been so much work done that's been in the popular press about behavioral economics and the importance of the unconscious mind. But still, a lot of those old perceptions are still out there occasionally, even though you don't get it as much as you used to. Um, so a lot of times yeah, it's just clients almost sometimes occasionally just have to see it. And once you
Yeah,
get someone in an interview and they start talking about emotional things like how this seed is the foundation of my generational journey, then it usually starts to come together and they say, huh, oh, okay, I see it now. And they
yeah.
start to see the possibilities.
It's funny that you mentioned behavioral economics because one of the tricks that I use, and I guess it's been some time now, but I guess it must be now 15, 20 years ago that really behavioral economics became a thing, became aware. Dan Ariely wrote the Predictably Irrational, and Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize and all that kind of thing. So now I'll say to clients things like, if behavioral science has taught us anything, it's that, everybody thinks that, they make decisions based only on logic, even though everybody else doesn't, but I'm only logical.
Right,
And
right.
then, they're, because everyone does feel that way, and the client themselves like, oh yeah, that's me. Also, yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and it's funny. So, obviously you and I don't know each other that well. I haven't mentioned to you that in this, my quest for understanding the subconscious motivators, I actually got certified last year as a hypnotist because I wanted to
Oh, okay.
find ways to get at the subconscious. And it's been interesting because one of my questions that I was wondering about, and I think it's because of the hypnotism experience, is if you've noticed any differences when it comes to these subconscious motivators between cultures, whether subcultures in the US or other countries. I encountered this because I was working with a client who's originally from India, and it was just so interesting to me because all her metaphors were, for me, they were like a fairy tale out of India or something. The pictures that came to our mind. It's so cool for me, but I'm wondering. I know, certainly there's Carl Jung who talks about these universal metaphors that we have, but I feel like you're the metaphor guy. So,
Yeah.
what do you see when it comes to that?
So we do see differences. We probably see those differences less than one might expect,
Hmm.
because we are a lot about the universals. So certainly people they have different points of reference in different countries. They'll use different metaphors and different language, different phrases, different idioms in different countries. But often, not all the time, but often it comes back to something simple and kind of universal because we all have these universal needs. We all want to be loved. We all want to be respected. We all want a connection with other people. Um, we all want to feel successful, whatever that means. So, at some level, we are, as humans, much more similar than we are different. That does not necessarily mean there cannot ever be any differences among people, especially if you're looking at different kinds of behaviors. So, to give you an example, we did some research a number of years ago with a pharmaceutical client that was creating a smoking cessation treatment. And they were studying and comparing people who had successfully quit with people who had tried to quit but had not. And what we saw was a really important metaphorical difference. The people who tried and failed to quit saw the process of quitting as like a magical transformation. Like today, yesterday I was a smoker. Today I'm not. I'm wiping the slate clean. I'm a new man. But what would happen then is those people would go out on a Saturday night and they'd have a couple of beers with their buddies and they'd feel a moment of weakness and they'd light up a cigarette and they would just be like, oh, well, I have failed. I am back to who I used to be. I've transformed back to the old me. I'm a smoker again. Whereas the people who successfully quit thought about the process of quitting more like a journey with sidetracks and potholes and uphill and downhill with support needed along the way. And they could have the same experience. They go out for a couple of beers with their buddy, they light up a cigarette, and the way they look at it is totally different. They think, well, okay, I wish that hadn't happened. But what can I learn from that moving forward? Uh, I'm still in the process of trying to become a non-smoker. They don't look at it so black and white. So what our client was able to do was not only through communication, but also they built an entire program around checkpoints, support, um, figuring out like logging your behavior so you know when you're about to maybe have a weak moment and think about, okay, what can I do to plan so that I don't smoke at that particular moment? And giving you support all the way from beginning through the end, whatever the end might look like. So that's one example of one group saw it as a journey, the other group saw it as a transformation, made a very distinct difference in how they behaved. And our client was able to take those insights and try to push people more toward the journey mindset.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yeah, that's a great example and interesting to hear. As we're talking about this and I'm thinking overall about this whole field and how we provide value versus AI. The pessimistic side of me has been saying that I'm not sure if someone wanted to get started in the insights field. I'm not sure if I would recommend that they go forward with what's going on with AI and all that. And then I read your white paper and I felt like, oh, I think I'm being a little too pessimistic about that. And I just wonder what advice do you have for someone who's starting out in the insights field?
Yeah, I tend to be optimistic, while still acknowledging that AI can do a lot of things. I mean, I use it every day. I mean, it's tremendously helpful. But it is a tool. Just like if you supply a wrench to a mechanic, the mechanic will use the wrench, but the wrench doesn't mean the mechanic is irrelevant. You still need the mechanic for the wrench to work. And at the moment, anyway, I kind of look at AI in that way. It's one of the things that we can use that makes us better, uh, but um, it doesn't it doesn't supplant our particular role.
Mhm.
So, at least not yet. So, my advice for someone coming into the insights field, I mean, it's a pretty simple advice. Uh, so it's to read everything. So that means research related things, marketing related things, but also it's strategy related things as we look to elevate ourselves from less of a vendor to more of a research partner. But read about culture, read about history, read about psychology, read about sociology. All of these things will be valuable to you at some point in your career. You're building these connections in your mind, and you never know when one of those connections will become relevant or important. So, as I said in that white paper, the challenge is not AI, the challenge is IA, this insight atrophy. So, the more tools that you or the more connections that you have in your mind across different domains that you can bring to bear on research questions, the better off you will be.
Yeah,
What do you
yeah.
think? Does that sound like good advice?
Yeah, I think it does. You actually took me back a long time from when I was starting out, and I remember a friend had gone to an interview and they asked her a question about current events, and it was like, oh, and I hadn't listened to the news that day, and I was thinking, yeah, I don't know if I would have known that. And we were so young that we just think, oh, you need to listen to the news just to prepare for that interview. Versus like, no, at a certain point, you need to listen because it's part of who you are. You want to know what's going on in the world, which is what they were trying to ascertain in the interview.
Yeah,
Are
right.
you? So it is, that certainly sounds like good advice, but it also, and it may answer the next question because, so that's great for someone starting out, but like present company accepted. What about for those of us who have been in the field for a long time
Yeah.
and want to make sure they're not falling behind? I don't know. Is it the same advice or any additional thoughts for those of us who want to make sure they're not falling behind?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of the same advice. I mean, that learning, I mean, still read a ton.
Mhm.
It's sort of like the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. So
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
you you just read more. But then also in the context of AI, I've gone through my own personal journey on this, where a couple of years ago when we first started hearing about AI, I found it really kind of scary. Uh, and then for whatever reason, I started using it. And I started using it more and more and more to the point where now, like I said, I use it every day for one thing or another. The more you use it, the more you see both how it can be beneficial to you, but also you can see the limitations of it as well. Uh, and you can start to see where that human edge is very important. And in research, you start to see where humans talking to humans is still, at least for now, an extremely important point of differentiation or an important way to overcome that insight atrophy. And AI can do a lot of things to help you in that journey, but still the importance of that human interpretation, that human analysis, is still really, really big. So my advice there is, at least what my experience was, is don't be afraid of it to the point that you don't want to use it, or you're only using it for like little stupid things. Play around with it. Try to bend it and break it in different ways, and you'll see how it can benefit you, and you'll also learn where the gaps are, where that human edge is especially important.
That I think that that's great advice. And just as you're saying it, I was reflecting on that and on everything we discussed. And just I know we're pretty much at the end, but I just want to make sure I get all the great nuggets out of you. And you had mentioned this story about a consumer that said, just I'm thinking about this in the context of the human to human interaction. So when the consumer said, "Oh, you have to be sure you're eating healthy these days."
Mhm.
Tell me about the thing that that your team or you noticed with that interaction. I think that's a great human to human example.
Yeah. So in the white paper, I talked about things that would be very hard for AI to replicate at this point. And one of the things that I talked about was in interviews where you're really trying to get deep into someone's subconscious thinking, not just sort of skimming the surface and asking a couple of questions. AI can do that pretty well, but where you're really trying to get down low into some like unconscious cultural stuff. We were doing a project for a food and beverage brand. And yeah, like you said, I heard this comment from one consumer, and she said, yeah, you got to be really careful about what you eat these days. And you're like, huh, I wonder why she said these days. And then I heard somebody else say something very similar. So, well, now you really want to watch what you're eating. So at that point, it struck me like, what is these days now? What does that mean? So I asked something along the lines of, you said now. What do you mean by now? And that opened up, and she started talking about, well, all these dyes in foods today. That's not how it used to be. We used to eat more pure. So then all of a sudden I was thinking, I probably want to listen for this. And it came up in almost every discussion we had. And just asking about, what do you mean by these days? What do you mean by now? Um, it just opened up this whole discussion about, you know, dumb Americans and their terrible food habits and people not being aware and these food companies that are out to poison us with their dyes and chemicals and the FDA not really looking out for us. So there's this like low grade, I don't know if paranoia is the right word. I'll call it that. Um, but cynicism is probably the more appropriate word. Um, this kind of low grade cynicism out there that's really shaping how people think and feel about food. And I'm not convinced that an AI interviewer, for example, would have gotten to that because we did not expect to hear that
Yeah.
in the interviews. We would not have thought to train the AI interviewer on that because we weren't expecting it. But because we exist in this culture, one of the things that we as humans do is we have intuition. AI does not. AI is not a sentient being living in the culture. We had an intuition. It's like, huh, you hear a lot of stuff. You hear RFK talking about stuff like this. They just banned food dyes. Maybe there's something interesting here. And sure enough, there was. So yeah, that example I think kind of shows how these really little subtle things that people say almost in passing that would be very easy for a human interviewer to overlook would also be very easy for AI to overlook. So the lesson there is, when having discussions with consumers, one of the ways that we can continue to add value above and beyond what AI can do is be attuned to those little things, follow our intuition, be aware of some of these subtle things that people are saying where you might be able to open up a huge chasm of meaning if you can just poke at it a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that point that you said that AI is not a sentient being because, and especially the current version of GPT really seems to be sentient, and that is a little bit like a parlor trick.
Yeah.
That's just how it interacts. So it's important to remember because if I were AI right now, I would say, "That's a great point, James. Thanks so much."
Right.
But since I'm not, I'll say, actually, James, that really is a great point, and I actually really mean it.
Yeah.
And I will say that for the whole interview. Thanks so much for taking the time and giving me and the viewers this input. I think we went a little bit over because it's just so valuable. So I'm glad you agreed to do this and take the time. This was a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
It was fun. More than happy to do it, Jay. Thank you so much.
And thank you. I am going to just I'll stop the recording and say thanks